The second missionary journey. Our journey ended last week with Paul together with Silas visiting some churches in the provinces of Syria and Cilicia. This week we're going to visit new cities and new provinces when following Apostle Paul. It's all about the journey. Many moments trace his experience, and doubtfully we're going to be able to touch on each and every one of them. However, let's open our maps and see and find where God led those two missionaries.
We are covering from the end of chapter 15 of Acts through chapter 18. After spending some time in Antioch, Paul talked to Barnabas to go back and revisit the places where they started the work. But a disagreement on whether to bring John Mark with them made them to split. Paul didn't want to take risks with someone who already deserted them once, while Barnabas was more like a person of second chances. Later on, Paul will accept John Mark, but for now, he chose Silas to go with him, while Barnabas and John Mark went to Cyprus. Paul and Silas head through Syria and Cilicia and made it to Lystra, where the previous trip ended. Here, they get reinforced with a young fellow named Timothy.
And one would think that Apostle Paul was consistent with his beliefs and followed faithfully his principles. However, chapter 16 starts with a story that seems to portray him just the opposite way. Is that right? This story provokes some questions and also brings some wisdom. Where am I going with that? We learned and confirmed last week that the council in Jerusalem made a decree that one does not need to be circumcised to become a Christian, correct? On the contrary, Paul, here in chapter 16, persuades Timothy to get circumcised. This is his new co-missionary, and he has no chance of any other option if he wants to follow up on the mission. It's nothing else but Paul being everything for everybody, a Jew for the Jews, and etc. It's not for salvation that he did this, but for the mission. It's not for justification, but just for the chance to preach the gospel to the Jews. As fervent Paul was in persecuting the Christians, even more so was he in chasing after his fellow Jews for their salvation.
Paul was so vocal about circumcision meaning nothing and not to impose it, and now he requires it from this young guy? There are already so many challenges and controversies for the Orthodox Jew to work with when confronted with the news about Jesus that Paul didn't want to add any more potential obstacles. And I admire Timothy for his sacrifice and dedication not to put himself as obstacle of the gospel. This is a very big lesson. It's not just about being right, but about helping people to connect and to relate to the message about Jesus, avoiding obstacles and helping them grow.
Paul had the custom to worship on Sabbath in synagogues, or at any place for that matter there was prayer or any kind of praise of God. It was important for him to meet some Jews, believers, or Gentiles who were ready to listen to his message. And he was doing the same thing, and the outcome was always the same. People were amazed, people believed that Jesus was Christ, and somehow the city people always ended up chasing them out, beating them up, or jailing them behind bars in heavy shackles. Looking back now, it feels like Paul was never surprised by that. He seemed to have been expecting always this kind of reaction from the residents. And it only proves to me how determined he was in preaching the gospel despite of any known adversity that can come. And it proves to me how crystal clear his understanding was of Christ's forgiveness of sins and justification.
Paul has some ideas where to go, but God's Spirit doesn't allow him. I don't know how this manifested, but he tried to go here and he got a no. He tried to go there, he got a no. Then he got a vision pointing him to Macedonia. And this is where they followed. Have you had such experiences with God? It's amazing. In Macedonia, they got into Philippi, and here they established the first congregation in Europe. This is interesting, but there are some more interesting points here as well, like there was no synagogue in this place, but still they looked for a place of prayer on Sabbath. It wasn't because of the working hours of the synagogue. This does speak and say something about the Sabbath. Also, Here, the group addresses a group of women. And we have Lydia's conversion and her leadership in the conversion of her household. Then the female slave that was possessed by a spirit which allowed her to be a fortune teller, making good money for her owners. She was following Paul and the group, shouting after them, and finally Paul gets annoyed and chases the spirit out. Great miracle, but not financially wise. The slave owners get mad for losing their income, and they work the crowd to force the magistrates to beat Paul and the group and to imprison them. Around midnight, boom, an angel liberates them. The jailer, fearing his punishment for failing to perform his duty and to guard them, thinks about suicide. But it's stopped by Paul because they didn't flee. This hits the jailer. He's intrigued. He wants to know more. And him and his family, they find joy in accepting Jesus. God's way to the soul of every person is amazing. From there, the group is headed to Thessalonica, the capital of Macedonia. And here, they reach a synagogue.
Have you ever wondered, where is it that Paul found unquestionable grounds in how to turn the hearts of Jews after Christ? And let's not forget, they didn't see in Jesus the Messiah because this is the way it was sculptured, the image was sculptured in their minds by the rabbis and the teachers of the law. In the beginning of chapter 17, verse 3, it is revealed that Paul was reasoning from the scripture with some Jews in the synagogue for 3 Sabbaths in a row. What he was talking to them? He was explaining and proving that the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. And here is Saul. Now Paul was breaking into pieces the Jewish image of Messiah as liberator of Israel and king of the Jews. How? By pointing out the real description of Messiah. Humbled, suffering, humiliated, killed, exactly as Isaiah spoke about it. And you know what? Because of that, some Jews were persuaded to follow Silas and Paul, as per verse 4. I heard from some Jews themselves that these passages in chapter 53 in the book of Isaiah are never read before the congregation in the synagogue. And asking a rabbi in person about it is considered preposterous. So if you want to present Christ to a Jew, just sit with them and open the Torah in the book of Isaiah chapter 53.
The message in Thessalonica got to some Jews, but also a large number of God-fearing Greeks and quite a few prominent women accepted it. It's interesting how the demographics expand. It didn't take long for the opposition to create new turmoils, and the group moved to Berea, where they found more noble Jews with more noble character, meaning that they accepted the message with great eagerness, but every day they studied the scripture to make sure that what Paul was saying was indeed true. Then, new agitation, and Paul moved to Athens.
Yeah, Paul will move through Thessalonica, then Berea, and then he will get to Athens, where the intellectual and the cultural elite resides. Every new place brought new experiences, and here in Athens we see Paul addressing the council of the Areopagus in a very different manner than we're used to see him talking to Jewish believers. He meets them at their grounds, connects with them with what they have grown to understand. The apostle will end his journey in the city of Corinth, where he stays for a year and a half. There he will meet his lifelong friends to be in the faces of Aquila and Priscilla. And more importantly, Dr. Luke reports about the vision that he has, that Paul has to persist on staying in Corinth and keep on speaking. God has started this amazing journey, and God was leading it all along. What a journey.
The dynamic of the events is amazing, and this lesson is just gliding through a significant period of the church history. In Corinth, Paul gets enough of the stubbornness and abusiveness of the Jews, and he washes his hands and declares that he's going to the Gentiles. The leader of the synagogue follows him, but then the common development follows. Lots of planting and nurturing, lots of new cultures and barriers overtaken. But there was an area in Asia that was closed for the missionaries on this trip. Will it open next?
Join us next week for the third missionary journey.